why does classical music disappear into a black hole on streaming platforms while pop music gets endlessly streamed and recycled? Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Practice Room, the Modern Classical Musician podcast. My name is lea.violin. I'm a violinist, moderator and climate ambassador from Germany, based in Germany. And in today's episode, we are tackling something that's quietly shaping the future of classical music. Why classical musicians are invisible on streaming platforms and what that means for careers, audiences and art itself. If you have ever wondered why your recording doesn't reach as many people as you hope for, or why the numbers feel so low compared to pop music, this episode is for you. By the end of this episode, you will not only understand the system, but also why it behaves the way it does. Streaming is supposed to, in a way, democratize music. Upload your music, reach millions of people, bypass gatekeepers. But classical music doesn't fit the system. Algorithms are built for three things: short tracks, repetitive listening, and immediate engagement. But classical music is different. It's long form, structurally complex, and it's not really designed for looping. And then there's the metadata: composers, movement, opus number, performers. If that's not perfectly structured, the algorithm simply doesn't know what to do with your music. So what happens then? The music kind of disappears in a black hole. And now let's talk about something that people don't really like to talk about, or it's like a secret topic: money. Because even if your music does get streamed, how much are you actually earning on it? So here's the average number in 2026. There's no really a fixed per stream rate, but we can look at average numbers. So on Spotify, it's roughly $0.003 to $0.005 per stream. On Apple Music, it's slightly more. It's around $0.007 to $0.01 per stream. And on YouTube, it's kind of the lowest payment. It's around $0.0007 to $0.002. But YouTube, of course, works a little bit different since you have there the subscriptions, advertisement, etc. So on YouTube, the per stream payout, it's the lowest from the most common platforms, but you have other income possibilities there. Let's make it real. If you get 1,000 streams, on Spotify, it's around $3 to $5. On Apple Music, it's around $7 to $10. And on YouTube, it's often less than $1. And that's all before distributors, labels, management, or whoever gets paid. And here's the important part in it. The platforms don't actually pay per stream. They collect all subscriptions and ad revenue, put it into one big pool, and distribute it based on your share of total streams. And that's where the problem for classical music starts, because of course, in brackets, we have less streams in average than pop music because we are more niche than pop music, which means that automatically the percentage we get from this pool, it's much less than what is there for pop artists. So, and that means that you are not just competing with other musicians, but you are competing with the global music industry. Apple Music slightly tried to solve this problem by opening a new app called Apple Music Classical. I had a contact last year with them. I talked to one of the CEOs and heads of Apple Music Classical. And what they try to do is, first of all, on Apple Music Classical, as the app name already says, you find only classical music. So you're not competing with the global music industry. You're just competing within your niche, which is classical music. Plus, the payment is per stream and you're not thrown into one big pool. Now, let's zoom out, because streaming outcome is just one thing. But what does it actually cost to record an album? Especially in classical music, it's not really common to release singles or to release regularly, for example, every month, 1 or 2 recordings. It's much more common to release one full album as your entrance card kind of to the classical music business. And there's still the idea that releasing an album means success. But the reality, unfortunately, in 2026 is very different from that. Let's break it down to a calculation, which is kind of realistic based not just on my experience for my album, but generally for all the musicians I know and for average costs to record and produce an album. Let's create a scenario. And we are recording a very small chamber music album. So we are having 3 musicians, me and 2 other musicians. We are having 4 rehearsals, each rehearsal 3 hours, and we pay, or I want to pay the 2 musicians I invite €50 per hour for the rehearsals. That's already €1,200. Then, if I don't have the space at home, and I want to record, for example, with a pianist, but I don't have an actual piano at home, since I'm a violinist, I need to rent a rehearsal room for that a month of rehearsals, and that can be around €180. Then I need a studio for the recording. It's going to take around 2 days for the recording of the album. Let's say per day it's €800. So it's already €1,600 for the studio. And of course, I should pay my musicians I invited too, because it's their job. They are not like volunteering to record my album with me. Also, if that's very often or very common in the music business, but I want to pay them fairly. So again, I'm calculating an hourly rate of €50 per hour. And that's €1,400 for the 2 days in the studio for 2 musicians. So still we are talking about a pretty small project, just chamber music. Of course, the costs are totally different in case you record with an ensemble or even with an orchestra. Then comes the post-production, editing, mixing, mastering. That can easily be around €2,000. Then you need visuals, like you need a cover. Let's say you are not using ChatGPT because maybe you don't have an experience and you're not a designer and you actually don't know what looks nice and you didn't spend hours and hours and hours by teaching yourself how to design a cover. Then you ask a person, and that's going to be probably around like €500. Then you need photos for the booklet, for the cover, etc. So you have to ask a photographer, which is going to be around €300. And then you have a booklet, which you have to write. So that's another like €200 for that person. And now comes the part that nobody kind of talks about. It's the pay for the recording. Like you pay for your own recording, because labels, they own your recording when you release an album with them. So and sometimes, or mostly nowadays, that means that you have to buy, as an artist, CDs from the label upfront. So which means you organize the studio, you organize the musicians, you rehearse, you paid for everything, you practice, you paid the studio, you paid for mixing, mastering, you paid for everything. It's a ready product. Then if you want a label to release it and you don't have an exclusive contract, which is just the case for a very, very, very small number of artists, you have to pay, or the label is probably going to ask you to buy CDs upfront. Your own CDs upfront, which means, for example, they will ask you to buy 400 CDs for a price of €7 per CD, which is covering like the publishing costs of the label, plus guarantees that the project of releasing your album is paid for by yourself, even if you are the artist recording it. And that can be these 400 CDs, each like €7 can be around €3,300, already including like taxes. Then you need promotion. You can easily calculate there like €1,500, €2,000 if you want your album featured in some major magazines. Can be mostly even more, like Realistic in the very big magazines is even around €5,000 to calculate for PR, which brings us, before earning anything, to an average cost of €16,000 to €17,000. And again, saying that's a pretty low budget in brackets. Of course, it's not low, it's a lot of money, but it's a low budget production that I didn't calculate a lot of rehearsal days, I didn't calculate a lot of recording days, and I didn't calculate like a big budget of promotion, because of course, if you, for example, want to do some album release concerts and maybe you have to be the promoter of those concerts, like rent a concert hall, etc., then you might even depend on not just a ticket sale, but even pay from your own pocket some parts of the rent, for example, for this venue, etc. So it's €16,000 to €17,000 before a single stream or a single income. Now let's go back to streaming. So let's say your album performs well and you reach 1 million streams, which is already, let's say, a lot in classical music. So that's roughly like €3,000 to €5,000 compared to your €16,000 to €17,000. That's not a lot. It's like not even 1/3 of it. So even at that level with like 1 million streams, you're not even breaking even. To break even, you would need to sell 2,200 CDs roughly, which is not that easy to do in classical music as well. Because I know it from myself, I know it from my own experience. People after concerts, they come to me and many of them ask for like, I don't know, an autogram card or something. And I always have my CDs with me. And many of them, they are very interested about it. They talk with me about it and they ask like, yeah, what's on the CD, etc. But then they ask, do you have it also online? Like, is it available for streaming? Because Lea, I don't even have a CD player anymore. And it counts the same for myself. The only place where I still have a CD player is actually my car. So I have some collection or a collection of CDs from some musician friends or generally musicians I met somewhere on concerts who gave me their CD to listen to it. And it's all in my car. And that's the program in my car to listen to because I simply don't have a CD player anymore. And yeah, times are changing. And you might think, okay, vinyl might be the new thing. But also, I mean, first of all, the production of vinyl is more expensive than the production of CDs. Second of all, one says that it's just a temporary trend. I don't know about it. I mean, we will see in the next few years. But also the percentage of people that have vinyl players at home is still not a lot. I mean, now let's come to the brutal reality in brackets. But I mean, well, it is kind of, especially nowadays that most of the people are only consuming music via streaming. So you release something expensive. You spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of effort. And that goes into a system where 90,000 songs are uploaded every day. I mean, if you imagine that 90,000 songs a day, for example, on Spotify, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, to imagine that number, and there's a lot of AI. I almost said a word I should not say on a podcast, which is public. There's a lot of AI. I don't want to call it music because for me, music is human made. So there's a lot of AI products released. So we are not just competing with other musicians, but we are also competing with a lot of AI stuff that's released there. So the main way of earning anything is not really the streaming in classical music. It's selling CDs, building an audience, and performing live. Because let's see it realistic. We anyway have a very niche audience in classical music. We don't have a lot of audience. Like the numbers say, for example, in Germany, 5%, that's the number, 5% of the audiences in classical music are responsible for 50% of the income in the classical concert halls. Because 5% of the whole audience are the people that are coming regularly to concerts and not just one-time listeners. Of course, you have then a group that is coming like twice or three times, but this 5%, studies show that those 5% are the ones that are more or less responsible for around 50% of the income. Streaming is an option to reach audience, but it's not reliable. Especially with those algorithms and those metadatas that the whole streaming system is based on. Selling CDs is only possible mostly after concerts. So that can be a possibility for you, but otherwise the only possibility you have is building an audience in a way that you have subscribers, maybe using Patreon or whichever platform. Actually, I opened an account on Patreon, so maybe you want to check it out. I started with it last week because I don't want to upload a lot of tutorials on YouTube because I don't see myself in first way as an educator. But of course, I also teach and I also want to share with you the knowledge I have, for example, about violin, etc. So you can subscribe there on Patreon. It's Lea Brückner. my name, and you can find there in the future, like every month, some tutorials about specific violin techniques. You can also participate in some surveys, like I will ask which kind of topics or which kind of technical questions you have, so I can shape the content based on some of your ideas. You can also actually book some one-to-one lessons there, not just for violin but also for moderation, since I'm a moderator. I'm doing like a moderation training for musicians, and you can also book there, for example, a one-to-one social media consulting. So if you're a musician and you want to start your social media, or you want to build it up, or you are at a certain point and now you want some new ideas, then yeah, I would be happy to give you some feedback on that. So you find a lot of different things there. Also my work actually as a climate ambassador, there's a possibility for that. But yeah, so for example, Patreon is a possibility, but there are also other platforms, or via your own website to publish some like packages, some teaching packages, and all that. Of course, you can connect with performing live. So for example, you can create a newsletter, and every time you perform somewhere live, you can ask people to subscribe to your newsletter, like either in the ticket shop where they are buying the ticket, or ask them like on a paper or in a book, even in big concert halls as possible. For example, in the foyer, you can put out there some lists or books where they can sign in with their email address, and then you can put them into your newsletter. So like to really build and grow a community, and not just to focus on the playing and on the product of an album, of a recording itself. But with all this conversation going on, I would say that the question changes. It's not anymore why doesn't streaming pay enough? It's more why does the system work like this at all? Because right now, of course, the platforms earn the most, labels own, and audiences listen. The question is where we musicians are in this chain, because we invest first and kind of hope later for the for any outcome, or actually any income. I would like to end this episode actually with some ideas what could change the business, and we don't have influence on all of it, but on some parts we might have an influence if we start working together as a music business and musicians, trying to work together in a way to change the system. First, I would suggest, and that's more an idea for the streaming platforms actually, a user-centric payment method. So right now, streaming works like this. All the money goes into one big pool, and it's distributed based on total streams. For example, you won't find me listening to rock, techno, hip-hop, rap, I think to none of those four. Which means if someone listens to classical musician mostly or only, their subscription still mostly supports pop music or pop artists. A better system could be user-centric. That means your subscription money goes to the artist you actually listen to. So let's have some creative ideas and fantasy together. There could be, for example, a button, not just where it's written like follow this artist or subscribe, but there could be also something like I want to support this artist. And then it means that a part of your subscription goes to this artist, which would change the whole payout system, basically. Then second would be fixing the metadata for classical music. This sounds technically, but it's actually fundamental. Also a suggestion again for the streaming platforms. Because streaming platforms still treat music like, artist plus song. But classical music is much more than that. It's composer, it's work, it's movement, it's performers. There are a lot of things, a lot of datas. And until platforms properly sort out those datas, classical music will always be miscategorized, under-recommended, and harder to discover. Apple Music Classical, for example, already changed this system. Since they are specified on classical music only, the metadata and the algorithm, etc., is adjusted to classical music, to exactly those things like composers, work, movement, performer, etc. Because this is all not just a small difference, that makes actually the big difference between being found and not existing in a way. Then, and that's something for us musicians particularly, alternative revenue models beyond streaming. maybe the biggest mindset shift in this is streaming should not be the main income source to hope for. Or if you already publish some things, then you know that streaming is not the main income source. And maybe it will never be or never become the main income source. So what works better? It can be direct to fan platforms, membership models, selling recordings at concerts, as I already mentioned before, and digital products, niche content, educational content, etc. So basically you use those listeners, those online listeners, to turn them into supporters and not just passive income. You think further than just about your streaming numbers. Then a big point, which is not going to like the industry, but it's more transparency in the industry. Right now, most musicians don't actually know, because also we don't really, or at least me and almost everybody I met and I know, we don't learn it in music universities. We learn it basically when it's too late and we already published our first album and we realize, that's actually expensive and it's not generating a high income, and actually I don't even have the rights anymore on my album because I had to give it to the label, so they are allowed to publish it, etc. A better system would mean in that field like very clear contracts, but that means that also the musicians need to understand contracts, clear royalty structures, because at the moment it's like, if you don't dig very deep in this topic, you don't even see through how the royalties are paid out. And it's we can be kind of sure that the system is always based on, let's say, supporting and protecting the big names, and everybody else, swims with the group and hopes to get a bite, kind of. And really the key is musicians understanding the business side of their work. And that already starts in the education, that already starts in universities, etc. That we really educate the young generation, the new generation about it, and not just learning by doing, but learning by mistakes. Maybe one could start to avoid that in order to help the new generation to build a more successful business model before making all the mistakes. You need to understand how the music business works and where our values as musicians can be in the future, although there's AI. Or it's not enough just to say like, we can create music and it's a special thing and it's a special moment, and that's what is unique about musicians compared to AI, because we are like humans and no machine can create as emotional as we artists can. I'm absolutely signing that. But in order for a big business to keep growing or to stay alive in a way, I think we need to dig much deeper in that, what it actually means that AI is coming, and not relying on that one point that separates us from AI or that makes us more special. So I think that really education would be about education about the music business, how it works and how it actually changed, is so important. Since for example, me, I had a lot of older professors who were teaching me, especially like my main subject, violin. And I know from many of other students and many of other young musicians, like under 30 in my generation, that they had also older professors or pretty old professors, which is great in a way that, they have a lot of experience and they are big names, but in case they were not all the time taking care on how the business developed, they might have lost the connection to the business and the overview of how the business actually works. So if you're relying on your main professor to teach you how the music business works and how to make a career, he or she will give you the same advices what works for her or him 40 years or 30 years ago. And it's so different nowadays, really so much changed. Also the role of competitions for classical musicians, etc. But that's another topic for another episode, I would suggest. Let's come to the points what could be changed and what might help. So there's a fifth point I was thinking about: rethinking the role of recordings generally. I think that might be the most uncomfortable idea. We should lower the barriers of entering to the classical music business as a professional in a way that you need a recording to be taken seriously, but that's not just in classical music, that's also, for example, in jazz like that. But you need money to, and not just a little bit, you really need money. So that's not just difficult, it's basically structurally unfair. Now we have an overload of musicians. I'm saying that myself being a musician, but there are too many musicians for a not that much growing business. So to lower the barriers could mean that there are entering even more musicians, but it might help to make the competition simply more fair. Because a better system could mean lower production barriers, more flexible formats, and less dependence on an expensive album. Very few universities, for example, offer, including mine where I was studying, actually that's how my first album, Pangea, was produced, that for my master's exam I could record an album plus play a recital, or I could just play a recital, but I chose to record an album because for that I would be allowed to use the studio of the university, and that was a massive help for me. So I think that could be something amazing from music universities doing, like instead of writing a master thesis, or you would not write a master thesis, but you would record an album. And I think that could be a very nice alternative for young musicians to enter the business. Anyway, the idea behind that, to make the competition or to make the access to recordings more equal and socially fair, is that a real musician releases a full album comes from a different era, because we are not anymore in the era that albums necessarily lead to success or place you in the business, or even allows you to earn some money. Albums are a huge investment with a uncalculable outcome. So this mindset, what we have in classical music, a real musician releases a high quality album at the beginning of the career, and that's the starting point, is totally outrated in a way that we live in times that for almost no musician anymore an album makes a big next career step, because we simply live in different times. Times changed. Labels are not paying the musicians, or mostly not paying the musicians anymore. And in that way, the question is, what I also meant with to make it socially more equal or lower the barriers, why does it need to cost 16, 17, 18,000 euros just to be considered professional? We should rethink what and why and how a musician in classical music gets the title professional musician. So I think that the system is not just in a way broken, this whole streaming system and music release system. It's, I think, totally outdated in a way. And I think this is a nice end for this episode. If this episode gave you a clear structure of how the whole streaming system or music recording system works, you're more than welcome to subscribe or follow me on any social media like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It's basically everywhere, lea.violin. And you can, of course, also share it with some musician friends or anybody who you think might be interested in how the music business works in 2026. Thanks for listening to another episode of Beyond the Practice Room, the Modern Classical Musician podcast. Have a nice day wherever you are or whatever time it is right now that you're listening to me. I'm Lea Brickner and hope to see you next time again.